Hey, eighth grade. This is your video for the middle colony lessons. For those of you guys that are on my sixth period class, that would have been on the Thursday, September the 10th, and for those of you guys in my second period class, that is on Monday the 14th. So the middle colonies. So what you're going to make sure you guys do is go ahead and go into your modules. Of course, mine looks a little bit different. You guys just have the days that you attend. Um, and obviously, if you haven't done your attendance, make sure you've done your attendance. Hopefully, you guys, based off of what we did on Friday, hopefully you guys are all signed up for Go Formative. Make sure you guys do that bell ringer and Go Formative. Okay. So let's go ahead and get into our lecture for today. All right. So again, we have our here in just a second, when this pulls up, we have our agenda here. Come on. All right, so we're going to review what we did from last class, and we hopefully you guys will have already done your bell ringer, and then we'll do our introduction to the middle colonies, and then I'll show you guys your reading and everything that you need to do. All right, so if you haven't done your attendance, now's a good time to go ahead and pause that and go ahead and do it. All right, so our review of the New England colonies. So colonists were seeking religious freedoms. The desire for religious freedoms motivated some people to settle in the English colonies. Separatists, also known as the Pilgrims, wanted to leave the Church of England to escape religious persecution and to preserve their church. Remember, they want to actually physically separate from the Church of England. They want to practice it different. The Pilgrims were motivated mainly by the desire of religious freedoms as opposed to the desire for wealth. So that's the main reason why they came across, is because they're looking for that religious freedom, so they're no longer be persecuted. The Mayflower Compact established a framework of a government that would make laws for the good of the colony. That's important that you guys remember it, that they're making laws for the good of the colony. And in time it would elect representatives and a governor. So like the House of Burgesses that we learned in one of the earlier lessons about Jamestown, where they set up a form of representative government, they do the same thing based off of the Mayflower Compact. And this becomes very important because the foundations of representative government was established from the very beginning of the creation of the New England colonies that would eventually fight for their freedom. Puritans wished to purify the Church of England. So unlike the separatists that wanted to completely separate and be their own religion, Puritans wanted to purify it. They wanted to get rid of a lot of the Catholic parts that the Church of England, when they separated initially, Henry VIII, he kept some of the Catholic components in there, and they wanted to purify, is what they called it. They disapproved of many aspects, saying that these practices were too similar to the practices of the Roman Catholic Church. Town meetings fostered the ideas of democratic values like self-governing, individual choice, and the concern for the common good. The New England colonies were very much set around towns, and people would come to the town meetings, or at least men would, and they would discuss matters. They would choose officials to help govern and things like that. The economic features of the New England colonies. Colonists fished and farmed, though farming was not really good. They were not large farms. They were typically small little family farms. It was very rocky in the New England area. But they generated most of their wealth from shipbuilding, whaling, ironworking, timber exports, and the fur trade. They sent a lot of timber to Europe because over centuries and centuries of time, a lot of the forest in Europe were actually cut down. So logging was a huge part of the exports, and also made it so that shipbuilding in the colonies was really, really a major thing too, because they had so much wood to be able to build the ships. All right, so let's go ahead and get into our middle colonies. So give you guys a second, look at this picture, and what do you think it would look like today? This is back then called New Amsterdam. Well, today what we would be looking at is we would be looking at Manhattan in New York City. So this is, the Statue of Liberty would be out in this area here. You would see a ton of high rises right here. So this would have been New Amsterdam back then, and we're going to find out here why it's now called New York. So our guided questions, hopefully you'll know these by the time you finish your this lecture, as well as the reading for this section. What were the reasons the colonists of New York and New Jersey were established? Sorry, the colonies of New York and New Jersey were established. Why were the colonies of Pennsylvania and Delaware established? How would we describe the economy of the middle colonies, and what was the relationship between the economy and their physical environment? All right. So we're going to go ahead and watch this Mr. Betts video, and this will explain to us how New Amsterdam, which was a Dutch colony, eventually becomes New York, an English colony.
From New Amsterdam to New York. By 1664, the English colonies were really starting to come together. All of the New England colonies had been founded, and with the exception of Slowpoke, Georgia, the southern colonies were in full effect. But there was a gap that prevented the English from attaining a coastal tic-tac-toe, and that gap was a Dutch colony called New Netherland and its capital, New Amsterdam, located in current-day New York City. But before any of this, today's Manhattan was an island called Mannahatta, which for the Lenape, its original inhabitants, meant hilly island. The Lenape made dome-shaped houses using bark from the thousands of trees on the island. They hunted deer and fished oysters out of the East River. Side note, I wouldn't go in the East River even if I were on fire. But things would start to change in 1609. Henry Hudson, representing the Dutch, sailed up the river that would bear his name, looking for the Northwest Passage. Eventually he realized, whoa, this river certainly goes north, but there ain't nothing west about it, and returned to Holland, but not before noticing the potential gold mine of beaver pelts and claiming dibs on what would become the Dutch colony of New Netherland. Cut to 1624, when the first settlers from the Dutch West India Company arrived on Northern Island, today Governor's Island. It's a good thing they finally got here too, because just 4 years earlier, settlers from a rival nation had intended to arrive in the same area, but ended up a few hundred miles northeast. You might have heard of them, the Pilgrims. Anyway, the next year they decided to move to the next island over, and the settlement of New Amsterdam was founded. But the Dutch wouldn't be alone on the island, which leads us to the myth of the beads. As the story goes, Dutch leader Peter Minuet negotiated the purchase of Manhattan for $24 worth of beads. First, it wasn't beads. Well, it could have been, but it could have been anything. We don't know. But what we do know is that it was the equivalent of 60 Dutch guilders, and 60 guilders today is more like $1,000 than 24. Still not great, but better. Then there's the idea that it was sold. It's a misconception that Native Americans believed no man can own the land. But it's not clear whether the Dutch bought the land or just bought the right to share the land. Too bad the Lenape didn't know that European settlers weren't much for sharing. Lastly, there's the theory that it wasn't even the Lenape that made the agreement, but some other tribe on its way to Long Island. Thus, the tradition of taking advantage of immigrants fresh off the boat begins. Anywho, while the colony never really thrived, it did survive. Mills were built to take advantage of creeks and rivers, and because, well, these are the Dutch. New Amsterdam, while originally a company settlement that was religiously and politically intolerant, became a little religiously and politically tolerant, which was like super progressive for the time. Throughout the New Netherland colony, patroon ships or large tracts of land were given to those who could bring 50 colonists over and promptly exploit them. One patroon, Jonas Bronk, controlled much of what came to be known as the Bronx, currently owned by the Yankees. Who am I kidding? Yanks own all of New York. Yankees rule.
Yankees win!
Relations with the Lenape and other neighboring tribes were strained, especially when New Amsterdam was led by a colonial director, Wilhelm Kieft, just a real jerk of a guy. Things got so bad that settlers had to build a wall to protect themselves from natives, which eventually became the street known as Fifth Avenue. No, I'm kidding. Today it's Wall Street. Context clues. So horrible William Kieft was fired and replaced by Peter Stuyvesant. Come on, man. Look at that guy. Dude has a peg leg, and he didn't lose it to some weird 17th century disease. He lost it to a cannonball. He's a cannonballer. Stuyvesant was also determined to bring some order to the colony. For the most part, he made peace with local tribes, helped by the fact that they were busy fighting each other over furs. He regulated saloons, cracked down on smugglers, and pretty much tried to outlaw Lutherans, Jews, and Quakers. Who would have known that a wooden cyborg would be so cold? So it should be no surprise that when 4 English frigates with 450 soldiers arrived in New Amsterdam Harbor in August 1664, no one wanted to fight for Stuyvesant. By this point, only half of the residents of the diverse settlement were even Dutch. They pretty much said, if you want to fight the English, throw your leg at them. I'm headed to the pub. New Amsterdam, and in effect New Netherland, was surrendered without a shot, and later renamed New York, after the Duke of York, who was given the land by his brother, King Charles II. Must be nice. Last Christmas, I think my brother got me a Target gift card. Let me know in the comments, what's the best or worst present your sibling ever got you?
All right, so there we go. So New York was originally New Netherlands, which was a Dutch colony, but the English took it from the Dutch, basically, or some people would say that the Dutch gave it to them, but the show of force made them kind of force their hand. So it's named after the brother of the king. So that's because he was the Duke of York. So we now call it New York. So let's talk about New York and New Jersey. So the Duke of New York decides the colony of New York was just too big to govern. So he gave some of the land to his friends, Lord Berkeley and Sir George Carteret. This land became the colony known as New Jersey in 1664. New Jersey was a proprietary colony where the King of England gave land to a person or more than one person, and in exchange they basically are making payments or basically giving him rent. All right. Now, the colony actually was one that really did attract a lot of people because it was people from different religious backgrounds would come, and also there's very fertile soil there, easy access to the water, so you can still do fishing and whaling. So it was very, very attractive. And Berkeley and Carteret, what they decided to do is they were going to encourage free enterprise, which meant that the government paid very little role in the economy of New Jersey. But what ends up happening in 1703, these two guys begin to face financial troubles, and they return the colony of New Jersey back to England. When it goes back to England, it moves from a proprietary colony, which is basically all about gaining wealth and money, to a royal colony, which was directly under the control of the king. Now, the English crown tended to be a little more strict and harsh on the colonists, though did allow them the ability to practice their own religion, and for the most part still had the right to assembly and to vote on local matters. Now, this we will find will pose a problem in about 60 years when the crown really begins to impose taxes and things on them. And basically for the beginning history in the English colonization is they kind of didn't really bother the colonists, and the colonists were able to put some of these foundations of representative government in their way of life. And eventually, when they start to try to crack down on this, we have a revolution. But we'll get there here in a couple weeks. So let's go ahead and talk about Pennsylvania. So how does Pennsylvania become a state? Well, William Penn, who ends up starting Pennsylvania, was from a very wealthy family in England. And to his family and his friends' surprise, William Penn decides to turn to Quaker. He becomes a Quaker, which is a form of Christianity. But they have some really, what people thought at the time, very awkward beliefs. But Quakers believed that all men, women, nobles, commoners were equal in the sight of God, and that Quakers usually spoke out against war and would refuse to serve in an army. So this is really progressive, you would say, that men and women, nobles, and commoners were all equal. So that was a very progressive thought as far as the Quakers, and this is one of the reasons why they were not really all that well liked, and they were persecuted in England. English people persecuted the Quakers, So they felt that they needed to leave, and were able to, after King Charles II gave William Penn a charter for Pennsylvania in 1691. Now, Pennsylvania actually means Penn's wilderness. So, so William Penn shows up. He is given all this land in what is basically present day Pennsylvania, and he opens it up, and Pennsylvania becomes a place for people from many, many different countries. German showed up there, Scottish showed up there, Dutch showed up there, English showed up there. People from different religions, Protestants would show up, Catholics showed up, Jews showed up, Quakers obviously. So all these people had the ability to practice freely the way that they wanted to, and it was a very good place to farm. There's very good farmland in Pennsylvania, so they had a very strong economy as well. So it was very, very attractive to the people. All right, so this is just a chart which kind of shows you some of the differences between the New England colony and the middle colony. So if you look at the main reason for settlement, for New England, it was to avoid religious prosecution, but for the middle colonies, for the most part, it was about economic gain because they had proprietary, which was all about trying to make a little bit of money. Business and trade. In New England, you're looking at shipping, shipbuilding, shipping, fishing, and forestry. You're looking in the middle colonies, more of agriculture, skilled trade, and some shipping because they did have some good ports there. Agriculture, very limited in New England because it's very rocky up there. It's not real good for agriculture and growing things, but the middle colonies is very fertile farmland and produced a lot of grain that they shipped all over the West Indies as well as into Europe. Ethnic diversity, New England almost completely English, but you get to the middle colonies, you have English, Dutch, French, not French, but German and the Scottish Irish mix. The settlement structure, you're looking at close-knit towns in New England. You're looking at more scattered, more like a county type of organization in the middle colonies. And then cultural and society in New England, you're looking at religious uniformity, small family farms and businesses with few servants and slaves. You're looking at, in the middle colonies, more ethnic and religious diversity, larger farms and businesses that needed indentured servants, as well as they needed more slaves. They did not have as many slaves as what we're going to find out in the southern colonies, but they did have more slaves than New England would have had. So let's go ahead and look at our stuff for our reading. So when we go in here, we are going to make sure our attendance is done. Come on. All right, Go Formative. This is how you would get into your Go Formative, but there's also a video from Friday about that as well. So here's your reading. So we covered a little bit of the beginning of this reading. So as we went through, we watched the video by Mr. Betts about how the Dutch colony of New Amsterdam became under the control of the English, and we learned a little bit about how New Jersey and New York were formed, and then we learned a little bit about Pennsylvania. But there is some more information that you're going to need to get from your reading. So probably at Pennsylvania is where you will probably need to start to be able to fill out your notes. And this is what your notes are going to look like for this lesson. Again, always use that Alt bracket, and it will split your screen and allow you to see your reading. And here's what you guys are going to do this time. You're going to answer the question, what was the relationship between the economy and the physical environment in the middle colonies? Your literacy skill is going to be analyzing the text structure. Use what you have read to complete the table. For each main idea, provide 2 or 3 supporting details, which means 2 or 3 sentences. The first one is done for you. So the New Netherlands becomes New York. That's the main idea. Now you need to put down some supporting details that support the main idea. So here's the example I was given for you. New England wanted New Amsterdam for themselves. Dutch governor Peter Stuyvesant was unpopular, and the colonists refused to help him. So the English won without a fight. King Charles II of England gave New Netherlands to his brother, the Duke of York, and renamed it New York. So you're going to do the same thing for the section that I lectured about. You can refer to the reading to get you more information, to give you information on that. You're going to do it about Pennsylvania, and then also the main idea of the middle colonies thrived. So you're going to write just a few sentences to support what your main idea is. So I hope you guys, don't have any problems with this. And if you have problems with the lesson, just ask me the next class that you see me.